Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most intense economic whiplashes in modern history. We're talking about that sudden, incredibly violent shift from the vibrant, roaring 1920s right into the devastating economic collapse of the 1930s. And we're going to explore the massive macroeconomic facts of the Great Depression, sure, but we're going to do it through the deeply personal first-hand accounts of the people who actually lived through it. All right, let's jump in.
So, the 1920s. They were built on this illusion of a totally unstoppable American dream, right? After the First World War, the US was absolutely booming. Everything felt modern, jazz was playing, you had all this new technology popping up everywhere, and the stock market, well, it just felt like a guaranteed ticket to wealth. Everyone was caught up in the rush, fully believing the good times were just never going to end. But then, as one observer perfectly put it, without any warning, that sweet music just seemed to stop. And when it stopped, it stopped violently. $30 billion. Take a second to wrap your head around that. That massive sum, which by the way was 10 times the entire federal budget at the time, it literally just vanished into thin air in a single week. During the 1929 stock market crash, it created this visceral, terrifying whiplash for the American public. You've got an economy roaring one minute and total financial evaporation the next.
Section 1. The Roaring Twenties Crash.
Okay, so we really need to look at the mechanics of exactly how this unprecedented collapse happened. Notice just how rapid this chain reaction was. The whole crash was driven by excess credit, dangerous speculation, and just rampant inflation. So, on October 24th, Black Thursday, share prices plunged 22%. Just days later, you've got riots breaking out. And by October 29th, speculative investment plans are completely bankrupt. Speculators went broke, which pulled down the banks, which in turn dried up industry credit, and that completely halted production. Just a total top-to-bottom system failure.
Section 2. Human cost of the crisis. But numbers on Wall Street quickly translate to actual lives on Main Street. The sheer velocity of the job losses was honestly staggering. As companies lost their credit, they fired workers in mass. In just 2 years, unemployment leaped from 9% to an absolutely paralyzing 25%, 1 in 4 people. And these stark numbers translated directly into endless, winding queues at soup kitchens all across the country. The reality there was incredibly grim. The desperate learned really quickly that you had to push to the front of the line just to get the few actual vegetables sitting at the bottom of the pot.
This desperation led to a dark new phenomenon in American cities, the Hoovervilles. Bankrupt families, completely thrown out of their homes, had to take refuge in these maze-like shantytowns made of literal metal sheets tied together with string. And the misery in these camps was profound. Accounts from the time detail how mothers who couldn't even afford to buy milk were tragically forced to feed their newborns melted pork fat. This, as you might expect, led to absolutely heartbreaking rates of infant mortality.
Now, the crucial point here is that this level of extreme distress inevitably turns to anger. By 1932, frustration finally boiled over. You had 20,000 World War I veterans marching on Washington, demanding the bonus pay they'd been promised by the government. President Hoover, who was terrified of bankrupting the country, flat out refused. The military was sent in to disperse the veterans using tear gas, which left 4 dead and dozens wounded. And that brutal response, it effectively sealed Hoover's political fate for good.
Section 3. FDR and the New Deal.
So, the old world was about to be completely replaced. It's actually fascinating to impartially compare these two historical forces side by side. On one hand, Hoover felt his hands were tied by strict laissez-faire economic theory. He was relying on a sort of fanatical optimism that the system would just eventually right itself. In stark contrast, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who ended up winning the 1932 presidency with 57% of the vote, he aimed to completely transform the system. Surrounded by this progressive brains trust, FDR set out to rapidly legislate his way out of the crisis in his very first 100 days.
His very first target? The banks. $10,000. Through the Emergency Banking Act, FDR guaranteed small savers deposits up to this exact amount. It was honestly a psychological masterstroke. It successfully reassured a completely panicked public, convincing them it was actually safe to take their hidden cash and put it back into the banking system.
And then came the jobs. The sheer momentum of the New Deal was staggering. The government initiated these massive public works programs to fight unemployment head-on. They employed 4 million Americans to build hydroelectric dams, pave 1,000 miles of runways, and construct 124,000 bridges.
Oh, and to help pay for it all, the Democrats ended Prohibition, which generated entirely new, massive tax streams from alcohol sales.
Section 4. Photographing the American Struggle.
But here's a question. How do you make the broader public understand the necessity of these sprawling, incredibly expensive government programs? Well, you document the reality on the ground. To humanize the crisis, the government hired photographers to head out into the country, and what they found was frankly apocalyptic. The Dust Bowl was totally ravaging the U.S. heartland. Years of over-farming in the 1920s meant the topsoil was completely vulnerable. So these severe windstorms literally blew the soil right away. Bankrupt farmers had to pack dirty mattresses into old Chevys and migrate west along Route 66, just desperately hoping for a fresh start.
The photographers sent out to capture this, legends like Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans, they didn't just snap pictures. They gave a striking, undeniable face to the invisible people of America. They documented displaced migrants, striking union workers, marginalized African Americans, and struggling farmers. They managed to turn abstract economic data into undeniable emotional testimony. Meanwhile, back in the cities, this exact same desire for dignity was sparking a revolution in labor. Empowered by new labor laws, workers all across the country united in massive strikes. The scale here was totally unprecedented across countless industries. You had everyone from auto workers occupying factories in Flint to 125,000 New York elevator attendants literally freezing the city's skyscrapers. United in their struggle, they successfully demanded better conditions and a standard 50-hour workweek.
Section 5. Recession and rising tensions.
Of course, progress is never just a straight line. Just as the U.S. slowly found its footing, domestic fragility and international shadows threatened to undo the whole thing. The Great Depression was a global phenomenon, but the responses were radically different depending on where you looked. While the U.S., UK, and France leaned on democratic values and public works to combat unemployment, Germany and Italy turned toward fascism, totalitarianism, and heavily borrowing for rearmament. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union pursued communism and class struggle. Looking at this neutrally, you can see how these wildly different ideological choices set the stage for deep, dangerous global divides.
And back home, the U.S. democratic recovery proved to be incredibly fragile. In 1937, another stock market crash hit, wiping out nearly 50% of share values. Poof! Almost everything the New Deal had achieved was just erased overnight. It proved just how vulnerable the economy still was, which actually forced FDR to rapidly inject another $5 billion into the system just to stop the bleeding. Section 6. The Arsenal of Democracy.
Recognizing the escalating threats both at home and abroad, the U.S. strategy had to shift dramatically. Ideological tension soon leaked directly into America itself. By 1939, tensions were so incredibly high that 20,000 people attended a Nazi rally right in the middle of New York City. Recognizing the growing threat over in Europe, FDR secretly began directing the U.S. economy toward military production. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, the U.S. officially entered World War II. And ironically enough, it was this massive mobilization, with 6 million unemployed Americans suddenly lining up to join the military, that truly ended the Great Depression. As the government shifted pretty much entirely to war propaganda, the incredible documentary work of the 1930s was almost lost to history. But thankfully, due to some real foresight, 270,000 photographic negatives from those rural photographers were meticulously categorized and saved. 270,000. Those images preserve the true, profound human cost of the dirty 30s forever.
Which leaves us with this final thought. When we look back at those hundreds of thousands of photographs, at the anonymous, everyday Americans who survived sudden economic collapse, extreme poverty, and the brink of a world war, what exactly do we see? Do we recognize our own fears and our own hopes staring back at us in their faces? As we navigate the complex economic and social shifts of our modern world today, we have to ask ourselves, what can we actually learn from their incredible resilience? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.